While I don't intend on becoming a strictly Jetson-focused channel, I really can't help but notice that this little device did garner a rather large amount of interest. Now, being that that is the case, I did notice there were some commonly reoccurring questions pertaining to some of the abilities or perhaps lack thereof of this little device. So, for today's video, we're basically going to do a more casual and higher level overview addressing some of these questions about capabilities or lack of capabilities for the Jetson Orin Nano Super. So let's get right into it. Now, the first thing I want to do is something that I feel I kind of neglected to touch upon in the previous two videos I made on this device, and that is simply just give the token speed for running LLMs on this. So I am using Ollama with the verbose flag, and we're essentially going to just quickly test Llama 3.2 3B to get its token speed, and following that we will test Llama 3.1 8B to get its token speed. And then we'll compare them to a somewhat comparable device. So I will quickly just ask it some quantum computing questions, which will just kind of give it a good amount of text to respond so we can get a good speed rating. All right. And we can see here that we do get a lot of output, but specifically the one that we are looking at is the most bottom one, which is the eval rate. And it shows that we are getting 18.1 tokens per second. So I'm just going to keep that measurement here for now, because later we will kind of go ahead and see if that's good or bad or how it measures up to other similar devices. Now we're essentially doing the same exact thing, except we are going to be running Llama 3.1 8B. So I will just go ahead and ask the exact same thing. All right, and we can see here on the bottom that our eval rate was 6.09 tokens per second. So definitely a big difference between the two models. However, for our purposes, I think we're a little more interested in seeing how this compares to a different card. I want to quickly precede the comparison we're about to see by just saying this isn't directly fair or one-to-one. However, the Orin Nano is using NVIDIA's Ampere architecture, which is also what is commonly known as the 3000 series of GPU for the consumer grade cards. And to do a somewhat, I suppose, fitting comparison, I actually have an NVIDIA 3060 desktop GPU. Now, this GPU is about $250 new now, has 12 gigabytes of video RAM, and truth be told is a stellar option for running locally hostable AI solutions. I am actually testing this on a machine that has two of those in it, and this card is really just fantastic, even though it's kind of old at this point. Now, I want to make it clear that this is going to be a ton faster than the Orin Nano, and that's where this isn't quite fair, is that this card will pull around 170 watts max compared to the 25 that the Orin Nano will do. And you can say, hey, they're the same price, why wouldn't I just get the 3060? Which is fair, but you have to then factor in the additional cost of power supply, CPU, motherboard case, etc. And footprint, it takes a much larger PC and things of that sort. So we can see that I am just going to go ahead and do the same exact thing that we did before, where I'm running Llama 3.2 3B, and we're just going to ask it what a qubit is. And we can see that the speed here is rather quick. So all said and done, 109 tokens a second, which is extremely fast. And this is a small model, of course, but comparatively to what we saw with the Orin Nano, this is quite a big difference. To do the same right here with Llama 3.1 8B, I will just ask what is a qubit. And we can see that this is significantly slower than 3B, which is kind of the same thing we saw, obviously, while running this on the Orin. It's 45 tokens a second. So overall, the desktop 3060, as expected, is much quicker. But I did want to just provide some level of benchmark so we have a reference point at least to see how quick this Orin Nano is in running LLMs. Now, of course, the desktop card takes way more power and there are much more considerations. So one-to-one, obviously the desktop card is going to smoke it, but overall they do have different end use cases. As a side note, I want to mention why I didn't include the Pi5 in that comparison, and the reason for that is because the Pi5 with Llama 3.23b will benchmark somewhere around 3 to 4 tokens per second, as opposed to the 18 or so we saw on the Orin Nano. It wouldn't really have been a fair comparison, and I wanted to compare this to another NVIDIA GPU that folks may be more familiar with. With that out of the way, the next and what I think was the most asked question about this was whether or not it could run Windows. Initially, I had responded to some of those comments and said, I don't see why it wouldn't be able to, and I think it is important to say that I was completely off base with that and wrong. It is not likely that this will be able to run Windows, and I can definitively say that now because we're actually going to try it. So I have a micro SD here with an ARM build of Windows 11 that is essentially supposed to install Windows 11 on specific ARM devices. Now, this NVIDIA has an ARM Cortex, I think A78 processor, don't quote me on that. And this build would be our best chance at just getting an out-of-the-box Windows installation working on this. And you can see on the screen right now that there is a kind of almost boot menu that we're looking at. And we're going to go ahead from here and select the micro SD to boot, and we'll see what happens. Now we can see that we have our boot devices listed, and one of them is actually shown as the NVMe SSD. A few folks had mentioned being able to just use that as the boot disk, which based off this, it does seem possible, and I will look into doing that in the future and seeing if I can put a quick thing together on how to do that. But if I go ahead and select enter here to boot from the SD card with the Windows install, we're basically going to see this error, which is above my head, but essentially what it boils down to supposedly is that the boot libraries will not load for Windows, and it basically just means that without somebody with extreme knowledge in actually getting Windows running on devices like this, we likely are not going to see a Windows install for the Jetson Orin Nano Super. I'd like to quickly make note of something that I saw a few people having trouble with, and that was perhaps that they got one of these Jetsons, but the firmware may have not been the correct version that would have allowed you to follow the tutorial I had, where you could essentially go straight to installing Jetpack 6.1. In the screen we see here, you can actually see that the firmware version for my board is listed up there as greater than 36. And in the flowchart that basically went through the install steps, if yours was less than 36, there was a completely different installation setup and process that you needed to follow. So I just want to quickly make this known. So if you have a board here and you're having trouble installing the Jetpack operating system on it, it is very important to check your UEFI version here to see if it is greater than or less than 36, as that will change the steps you need to follow in actually getting this loaded up with an operating system. Two additional questions that I'll briefly touch upon is, can you game with it? Perhaps, but it is likely not worth the difficulty you will actually have in trying to get something like Steam running on here. I did try to get Steam working, and it just seemed to be more trouble than it would end up being worth, considering the existence of devices like the Steam Deck and things of that sort. The second was, can you use this as like a daily driver computer? And in kind of what we saw with trying to get Windows on it, it will likely be more trouble than it's worth to just use this for day-to-day, everyday tasks. It is more of a specific purpose-built device. The final thing that I want to touch upon that a lot of people were curious about, and I myself was as well, is are there any cases available for this thing? So basically, I've just gone ahead and Google searched what available cases there are. And no offense if like any of these are yours, but there does seem to be a rather lackluster variety of available cases for this. Now, personally, I am probably just going to 3D print my own and put it in that just to make things simple. But out of all of the ones I see right here, I really have to say this one does actually look rather cool. It almost makes it look like a mini little gaming computer, and I'm all for it. Like even case type there, it says mini tower. So this looks actually pretty darn cool. It's got the OLED screen there that seems to be showing some telemetry in terms of like the temperature and RAM utilization and things of that sort. And it also comes with an RGB fan, light bar, and on and off thing. Okay, and this is actually cool. They're actually showing it in the image here with the Jetson operating system on it. So that shows some level of competency on behalf of whoever made the case. And this will be a good sign for actually going with this. So this is actually really neat. I am kind of tempted by it. I can't really see any buying options for it, so I don't know how much it is or if it's still available, but that's cool. And I wanted to show this one in specific out of basically everything that I saw available. That's really going to conclude the video for today. Basically, I saw a lot of interesting questions pertaining to this device, and they made me curious as well, so I figured we would just kind of go through them and see the answers to some of them. Now I will likely test some more open source AI libraries and projects and repositories, as I'm very interested in open source and things of that sort. And in terms of Jetson stuff, I'm waiting for a camera cable that will allow me to directly compare the image and object detection capabilities of this versus the Raspberry Pi 5 with AI Kit. I guess outside of that, I am interested in perhaps putting one of these in my R1 robots that are open source now, so you can find them on GitHub and make your own, etc. But this would allow for a robot with a self-sustained, locally hosted AI that could perhaps be NSFW if you so desired. And as well as that, getting like a text-to-speech or speech-to-text setup on this. So running Whisper on it is something I'm very interested as well, to handle local offline speech transcription, which is useful in terms of a lot of local AI things and that sort of stuff. So that's going to conclude it for today. And I may or may not end up with one of these cases because I'm staring at it now out of the corner of my eye and it's growing on me a lot. So, all right.